I'm really trying to get Orion. And it's right behind this wonderful bank of clouds. Because I'm taping today. Wondering where Bradley is. I guess I have to say I don't know where he is. So if I get the opportunity to shoot Orion, I will. I'm just trying to keep this fire going. Explain who Bradley is. I guess it all started when I was a sophomore in high school. Maybe it started a little younger than that. When I was a freshman, Bradley lived down the street. He told me he used to watch me walk down the street with his best friend. He'd sit in the window and hide so I wouldn't see him. And he'd think about how he wished that he could have a girl like that. I know it sounds a little strange, talking about myself that way, but that's what he told me. Sophomore year in high school, then when he was a freshman, I kind of started to get to know him a little bit. Actually, I had a crush on his older brother. So one day I was over at their house and making out with his older brother on the couch. And when the brother tried to feel me up, I left. And figured out the next week at school that I was more interested in his younger brother. So we sat together on the bus, and I explained to Bradley how there was this girl that thought she liked someone and all of a sudden realized she liked his younger brother. And that's when things started to get interesting. Because Bradley and I could communicate telepathically. I remember one day that I went to a girlfriend's house and we sat and talked, and I went into the kitchen and hopped up on the sink and decided I'd sit there until Bradley got there, and within about 2 minutes there was a knock at the door. We weren't expecting anyone. And in came a couple of the guys from high school, followed by Bradley. We talked and we all went outside to hang out. And Bradley and I wound up under a tree holding each other and kissing and doing all the things that 13-year-olds can do when they're not getting intimate. And that was why I was trying to get a picture of Orion before the cloud cover hit. I actually got to see it for about 2 minutes before the cloud cover started, so I'm hoping for a clearing there. There was, especially in the winter, around basketball time, that he and I dated that year. I think it was New Year's Eve that he invited me to go to dinner with his parents and him. And we went back to the house after eating at a family restaurant on Western Avenue. And it was really thick and foggy, and we got to his house, and he'd moved. He no longer lived in our street. But we went over to his house, and I remember going down the stairs, and there on the stairs was this picture of a woman's vagina. It freaked me out. I don't remember how we spent the evening. I must not have been there very long, but his mom tried to convince me to stay the night so that she wouldn't have to drive in the fog, and I kept saying I couldn't stay the night because I was really rather concerned about it, about what might happen. So I didn't stay the night. I remember driving home in the fog. It was pretty intense. She drove pretty slow. And Brad and I didn't go out again after that. He started dating another girl. And I didn't hear from him till after high school. I remember having the feeling that he was coming over. My fingers are cold. I'm trying to pop the camera off. There we go. So we can shoot more of the fire. So I remember there we go. Oh. So I didn't spend the night, and we stopped dating. I remember calling one time over there, and his girlfriend's name rhymed with mine, so his dad said, "Oh yeah, Nan, I'll tell her. Tell him you called." And I knew he wasn't going to get the message that I called. So time went on, and I was in college, and I remember realizing he was coming over. So I ran out the carport door and headed halfway down the car length, and here pulled up a car, and he got out and came up and gave me a note, and he was going in the Navy, and his little handwriting, it said that he could wash away all thoughts of Nan with thinking about me, and he didn't know why that was. But he also said that if I ever needed anything, to let him know how that he and I could communicate without words. And I always remembered that. Somehow over the years, with me being away at school and on a mission, that note and further letters from him disappeared, but I never forgot it. And I remember thinking, when it happened, that it would be 4 years, and he'd be divorced, and I'd be able to talk to him. So 4 years went by, and I got in touch with his family and got his address, and he was getting a divorce, and we started writing to each other. He was in the Navy. And I worked at a doctor's office. I was Mormon at the time. And I didn't have a chance, really, to see him and talk to him. Let me get a Kleenex and then I'll tell you what happened. I was Mormon, and I thought it would be really nice to invite him to a family home evening. So I remember telling him that's what I'd like to do. And also telling him that I'd like to feed the geese. That's what I had in mind, and he told me he always fed the geese. When he got home, we didn't ever see each other. We'd written a couple of times. I remember the way the handwriting looked on the envelope. I don't know if I was too shy to call. I didn't know what to say. Felt a little bit too heavy, so I was embarrassed about that. And we never got together. So, I married, moved to Germany, and moved back to the United States, and after a little while, got a divorce. It was January or February of 1988. And I really needed some help. I really needed an anchor. I remembered what he'd said if I ever needed anything to contact him. So called his parents and I got his address, and he lived just 5 miles from where I lived. Pretty amazing when I think about it. But I went to the Dominick's at the corner near where he lived and called him. And he said, you can come over, and he gave me the directions on how to get there. I zipped through those directions and knocked on his door, and he welcomed me in, and his fiancée came out from the hallway, and he introduced me to her, Cecilia. My mother's name is Celia. I thought that was pretty funny. We went in the kitchen, and I asked him if I could have a glass of water. It was just a little half wall. It wasn't really a kitchen, just I reached up for the cabinet as if I'd been there before and grabbed a glass and poured myself a glass of water. Told him I was getting a divorce and gave him my phone number. And then I left. And when I went home in a week or so, I remember getting this phone call saying, "Is Mr. Rosalier there?" And it was kind of odd because my ex-husband was rarely out of town, and he was out of town that day. So I said, "No, he's not here. Can I take a message?" And when I hung up, I thought, boy, that sounds just like Bradley's brother. Maybe that was Bradley. Maybe he's coming to see me. Now, why you think that, I don't know, because hindsight being what it is, if it had been Bradley and he wanted to come and see me, he would have said, "This is Bradley. I'd like to come and say hello." But being wrapped up in my own thoughts, I didn't think of that, and started waiting that evening for him to come over. Kind of felt sick to my stomach a little bit, and it was a very stormy, stormy night. The wind was really howling, and it was very windy, and my son Mike was sleeping in his crib. So I laid on the couch for a while and was tossing a little bit and turning, and got up and went to bed. And in the morning I remembered hearing in my sleep on the couch knocking at the door. I don't remember how I figured that out, but I could remember that clearly there'd been some knocking at the door and that I'd just kind of turned over and ignored it. When I went to the front door in the morning and opened the door, there were these footprints in the snow. A car had pulled in at the end of the driveway. We had a rather long driveway. The car had pulled in a car and a half or 2 car lengths into the driveway, and there were these footprints up to the door, and very wide shoes, wide footprints. And that was the only thing I'd really noticed that I remembered. Well, the night I'd gone to see him is that when he put his shoes on to walk me out to the car was how wide his feet were. So I called, and over the course of the next week or two, 5 or 6 times, and just when I'd get the answering machine during the day, I'd start to feel really odd and think there's something wrong about this. And I'd say, well, I'd think to myself, and I'd say, well, I'm leaving a message for Bradley. If he could call me, this is Ann. And I left maybe 5 messages or so. Maybe a few too many. Once or twice I went and parked in a parking lot not too far from where he was. I didn't really want to bother him. I just needed a place to sit during my divorce, so I sat there. Kind of reminded me how when I'd been on my mission in Ecuador and I came back to the house in Park Forest. I drove up and I knew he'd sat in front of my house in his car. And during the conversation or two that we did have during this time, he told me he'd sat in front of my house. I did go over one afternoon, and as I pulled in, he came walking out of the house at lunchtime. So I didn't work too far from there. And he invited me in to the house. Said he'd never seen the phone number that I'd left on the counter. He never got it. Somehow that's when I realized his brother had probably picked it up and called and come over that night in the snowstorm. I don't know why that kind of thing happens, but I know it does. Somehow, over the years, I always felt kind of proud of myself that I thought he was coming over, and I did kind of hear the door knock. And I hadn't split up from my husband, so I was kind of proud of myself that I hadn't done that in my home. Invited an old boyfriend in when my 2-year-old son was sleeping in the bedroom. Kind of avoiding repeating mistakes that my parents made when I was a kid. So I kind of thought about that. Well, one of the interesting things that happened was that I had this dream. I had this dream where I was an Aztec or a Mayan or some kind of a Native American woman, and in the beginning of the dream I came flying down over the mountain, kind of just swooping down into this scene, and there were 2 pyramids, one straight ahead and one to the left, and a rosy glow of the morning sun coming up to the right over the mountains. And as I went into the dream, I became this woman laying down on the parapet with long hair, dark hair down to my knees. I was dressed in white, and my ankles were bound with these silver-looking metal bands. And it was first light of dawn, and it was time for the sacrifice, and I was the sacrifice. And in the dream, this big man, priest, who couldn't communicate with me, we spoke different languages, came up, and with his mind, with the telepathy, the bands opened up on my ankles, and not wanting to hang around and being extremely frightened, I jumped up and started running off to the left or the west, from the perspective of when I first looked down upon the pyramids coming over the mountains. And as I ran across, and I can run really fast, even in this life, as a teenager I could run very fast. I tore into that pyramid with the priest coming right behind me. And as we ran into the pyramid with him chasing me, somehow he took me in his arms, and I climaxed really strongly in the dream, and it woke me up. And when I woke up, I knew that that man was Bradley. And this was in the spring of '88. A couple of weeks after that, I was outside at the apartment where I lived, and I just had this feeling to walk across Route 53. They were building a lake over there, diverting the DuPage, this little branch of the DuPage River, and I had this feeling to walk across the street, so I walked across the street. And then I looked, and there was a pile of gravel, stones, about the size of your thumb, and this pile was up over my head. And I heard that same kind of feeling voice that you get say, go up those stones. So I walked up the stones, and when I got to the top and looked down, I, much to my surprise, saw the same landscape as I'd seen in the dream, in the sand and the stones that the construction workers were using to dig out this lake and build this lake. So in my amazement, the sun was going down to the right. It wasn't a morning sun, it was an evening sun, but the color of red, the rosy glow, was just the same. The 2 pyramids and the perspective and size were just the same as when I came up over them in the dream. And even one of the pyramid that I was facing, not the one I went into, but the one that I was facing, there was this ridge that cast a shadow that would be door size in perspective and I just was so shocked to see that scene from my dream there in the sand. The next day, I still couldn't believe it, so I decided to walk across Route 83 again and look, and the whole thing was flattened, both the pile of stones and the pyramids, and everything was completely flattened. But I didn't forget. I never forgot. Oh, I knew where he was going to be when I'd go outside when I was a teenager, if we were going to see each other. I remember the party at the F Men's Hall sophomore year, sometime in the winter. One of the few times I had a drink in high school. Smoked a little marijuana, I think. That I really remember. I remember being a little drunk. And he was there, and we went out in the back of the Volkswagen and kissed passionately as 13-year-old virgins can kiss. And somehow I remember that afternoon when I went to the house for lunch saying, "Oh, why didn't we ever do anything?" And he said, "I didn't know what to do." Maybe that's the only time in his life that he didn't know what to do. Maybe I'm the only girl in his life that he didn't get intimate with. Because when I had gone to, at the time of my divorce, I was being questioned by his parents when I was looking for him. They said, they wanted to know why. Why did I call them? And part of it was just remembering talking to his dad as I'd walked down the street on those walks before all this happened. And he'd always had such a friendly word for me. But I remembered that, and I felt comfortable that I could look him up when I was getting a divorce. So last weekend, doing some filming, I was invited over to have dinner with a friend. And when we talked about the '95 reunion, I must have mentioned Brad. And he said, Bradley, I think he's dead. I think he wasn't at the last reunion. Somebody said he's dead. Just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone. The plans they made put an end to you. Woke up this morning and I wrote down this song. Just can't remember who to send it to. 'Cause I've seen fire and I've seen rain. Seen sunny days that I thought would never end. Seen lonely times when you were my only friend. And I always thought that I'd see you again. Been walking my mind to an easy time, my back turned towards the sun. Lord knows when a cold wind blows, it'll turn your head around. There's hours of time on the telephone lines, talking about things to come. Sweet dreams and flying machines laying pieces on the ground. 'Cause oh, I've seen fire and I've seen rain. Seen sunny days that I thought would never end. I've seen lonely times when you were my only friend. But I always thought that I'd see you again. Thought I'd see you one more time again. There's just a few things coming my way this time around now. Thought I'd see you, fire and rain now. Da 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 da. So all this time, Orion's up there behind the clouds. I knew some car was going to come or go while I was here. It's not the neighbor I expected. And somehow it seems with the communication in dreams and being able to hear from the deceased. I guess the one time I saw actual ghosts or dead people for someone else, I would have expected that Bradley, of all people, that I'd be able to see him. Especially if we had that other life. Kind of laugh about it because when I went to visit his family, his dad said he had a little trouble with the ladies. Couldn't stay away from the ladies. Makes me kind of laugh because maybe he just forgot which life he was in. When he was back doing all the sacrificing and doing all the whatever caused that climax. No wonder he got a little exuberant in this life. If that's what happened, I don't know. It's an interesting thought. So no Orion. And the whole purpose of making this film is to ask, where's Bradley?
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Because I don't know where he is. This winter when I drove, anytime I drive in the foggy months, November, February, whichever, I would think about him and think about that drive when his mom wanted me to stay all night. I'd have lost my virginity that night, especially with that picture on the wall. I might have wound up with a different life, but I've thought about him in the fog. And this year was particularly strong, and I thought I was going to perhaps see him. I'd asked about it with the reunion, thinking that the next one maybe would only be a few years away, maybe every 5 years now, and perhaps I could go and look for him and say hello. So I may try again in the next couple of nights. Orion looks right above the neighbor's house before these clouds move in. But that's what's happening. And this fire is just to honor him and the help that he gave me. And to say goodbye if that's where he is.